A notorious gangland criminal has been sentenced to 20 years in prison after admitting that he planned and directed a plot to smuggle nearly a ton of cocaine.
A shipment of fruit. Wrapped, sealed, and stacked inside a cargo container. On paper, it was ordinary, bananas, bound for supermarket shelves in Glasgow. But beneath the fresh produce, something else was hidden. Something worth millions. In the shadows of global trade, one of the largest cocaine smuggling operations in Scottish history was unfolding. Over £76 million in high-purity cocaine, concealed in crates marked for grocers and wholesalers. No alarms. No raised eyebrows. Just another day in international commerce, or so it seemed. But this wasn't the work of a street gang or a reckless smuggler. Behind the paperwork and plastic wrap was a man with no appetite for chaos. He was methodical. Strategic. Ice-cold. To law enforcement, he was known simply as the Iceman. Jamie Stevenson. A name familiar to police, but nearly invisible to the public. A man who lived quietly in suburban respectability while orchestrating industrial-scale drug trafficking and a domestic street Valium empire that flooded Scotland's streets with deadly pills. How did one of Scotland's most elusive crime bosses build an empire beneath the radar, for years? And how did it all finally unravel? This is the story of deception, power, and a criminal network buried beneath fruit crates and suburban silence. He was born in Glasgow's East End, a place where reputation is currency, and silence often says more than words. Jamie Stevenson didn't speak much. Over time, people started calling him the Iceman. Not because he was violent, but because he was calm. Controlled. Careful. Always a few steps ahead. By the 2010s, he wasn't just another name in the system. He had become a key figure in Scotland's criminal hierarchy. Not flashy. Not loud. But trusted, by some of the most dangerous players in the game. At the peak of his operations, Stevenson wasn't just dealing drugs, he was running an enterprise. Cocaine, imported in bulk, hidden in banana shipments from Ecuador. Atizalam, a powerful street Valium, was produced in secret labs across Scotland. Pills that flooded communities and contributed to a crisis that still grips the nation. The scope was global. The reach was local. From South America's ports to the back alleys of Glasgow. He communicated through encrypted phones, used fake businesses as fronts, and built a network that stayed hidden for years. Authorities watched. Listened. Waited. But Stevenson didn't slip up easily. He didn't need to. So how did they finally catch him? And why, after all the evidence, did his sentence get reduced in a courtroom months later? In this story, we'll trace the rise of Jamie Iceman Stevenson, from the quiet streets of Glasgow to the center of an international trafficking empire. You'll see how encrypted messages, undercover agents, and years of surveillance brought him down. But before we delve deeper into this chilling case, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss a single story, because the truth behind the UK's most gripping true crime cases is always stranger than fiction. Jamie Stevenson wasn't raised in luxury. He came up in Glasgow's East End, a tough part of town where rules were unwritten, loyalty was currency, and survival meant learning fast. As a teenager, he got involved in petty thefts, small-time jobs that hinted at a bigger ambition. He was quiet, rarely emotional, and always calculated. Traits that would one day earn him a name whispered among criminals and investigators alike, the Iceman. But Stevenson wasn't the kind of figure who craved chaos. He didn't leave trails of violence or demand attention. He was careful. Always controlled. And that control, over time, became his greatest weapon. By the time he reached his 40s, Stevenson had built a different kind of life, one that looked entirely legitimate on the surface. He lived in a quiet, affluent area of Lanarkshire. A well-kept home, a family, children in good schools. To neighbors, he was polite and respectful. He waved from the driveway. Paid his bills. No one suspected a thing. But behind closed doors, Stevenson was still connected. Still active. And very much in business. He was a long-time associate of the Lions crime gang, one of Scotland's most powerful and dangerous organized crime families. In 2007, he was jailed for laundering over £1 million, tied to a £1.3 million cannabis seizure. The sentence made headlines, but Stevenson didn't. He kept his name out of the tabloids, avoided the loud bravado seen in rival gangs, and stayed in the background, exactly where he wanted to be. To the public, he was invisible. But to law enforcement, he was known as a trusted figure at the top of a very real, very dangerous food chain. During the early 2000s, Scottish organized crime was evolving. Cocaine use was rising rapidly, and new synthetic drugs, like etaizolam, were flooding the streets. Dealers didn't need cartels, they needed chemistry and connections. Stevenson had both. Import routes that once came from Spain or the Netherlands were shifting towards South America. Ecuador. Colombia. Brazil. Stevenson saw the change coming, and adapted. With experience, patience, and the discipline to never draw attention, he positioned himself at the crossroads of two criminal worlds, international trafficking and domestic drug production. And all the while, he never raised suspicion. Not with his neighbors. Not with his children's teachers. Not even with the people who lived just a few doors down. But even the calmest surface can hide deep currents underneath. And for Jamie Stevenson, the tide was starting to shift. By 2020, Jamie Stevenson wasn't just surviving in the world of organized crime, he was thriving. And his operation had gone far beyond Scotland's borders. The cocaine pipeline started thousands of miles away, in Ecuador. Legitimate shipments of bananas were packed into sealed cargo containers, routine, unremarkable, and moving through international ports every single day. But tucked beneath the produce was something far more profitable. Bundles of high-purity cocaine, expertly concealed and hidden in plain sight. From South America, the containers made their way to the Netherlands, Europe's logistical heart, before quietly arriving at Grangemouth, a major port in central Scotland. By the time they reached British soil, everything appeared normal. Legitimate. Just fruit. Except it wasn't. The operation moved an estimated £76 million worth of cocaine through this route. Enough product to supply thousands of street dealers. Enough to spark gang violence. Enough to destroy entire communities. But that wasn't all Stevenson was moving. While the cocaine flowed in from overseas, something else was being cooked up much closer to home. Etaizolam, known on the streets as street Valium. A powerful, dangerous benzodiazepine. Unlike cocaine, it didn't need to be imported. It could be made. Cheaply. Quietly. And in massive quantities. Stevenson's network operated makeshift labs scattered across industrial estates, garages, and private residences in central Scotland. Pill-pressing machines. Bulk chemical precursors. Masking agents. Thousands of blue tablets rolled off these machines every day, ready for the streets. The pills were cut, bagged, and distributed through low-level dealers, some of them barely old enough to understand what they were pushing. Others addicted themselves. These weren't minor offenses. The Valium epidemic had already claimed lives across Scotland. Overdose clusters in towns like Dundee and Ayrshire were being directly linked to the kind of pills Stevenson's network was producing. The scale was staggering. And the damage? Unmeasurable. Then came the break. It was subtle. Just one shipment. Intercepted after a tip-off from international intelligence agencies. The container looked normal, bananas again. But behind the cardboard and plastic wrap, investigators found something else. Kilos of high-purity cocaine, marked with coded packaging, destined for redistribution. It was the first visible crack in Stevenson's operation. One that would quickly grow into a full-scale investigation. And while the authorities had finally caught a glimpse of the operation, what they had yet to realize was just how far it reached. It began quietly. A message. A username. A trace of digital breath left behind in a place where criminals believed they were invisible. By 2020, European law enforcement had launched Operation Venetic. A multinational effort that would quietly unravel one of the underworld's most powerful secrets, EncroChat. EncroChat was no ordinary messaging service. It was marketed as Unbreakable, a secure, encrypted platform designed for privacy. But in reality, it became a hidden haven for organized crime, traffickers, killers, money launderers, and drug barons. And among them, was a name investigators had seen before. Iceman. They had no doubt. The calm, calculated figure from Glasgow's East End was still in the game, just smarter, more careful, and far more connected than ever before. The messages were buried in thousands of lines of coded text, disguised behind screen names and scrambled servers. But with the network compromised, the conversations came pouring in. And Iceman's messages weren't just idle chatter, they were blueprints. Dates. Container numbers. Drop points. Payments in 6 figures. Discussions about banana shipments. Mentions of the lab and the press. It wasn't just speculation anymore. It was strategy in writing. Police Scotland had been watching Stevenson for years. But now, for the first time, they had a thread to pull. And it led them into a sprawling network that stretched from the Netherlands to Lanarkshire, and deep into the mechanics of Scotland's drug economy. The National Crime Agency, working with Dutch and Spanish counterparts, launched joint operations. Search warrants were executed across central Scotland, in homes, storage units, and industrial parks. What they found confirmed the scope investigators had feared. Encrypted phones hidden in floorboards. Industrial pill-pressing machines. Vacuum-sealed bundles of cash. Notebooks filled with coded transactions. And blue pills, thousands of them. Still, even with the evidence stacking up, the case was far from easy. There were no direct witnesses. No camera footage of a handoff. No fingerprints on the containers. Stevenson had used burner phones, intermediaries, and layers of separation to insulate himself. Every move was calculated. Every risk, weighed and measured. And then, one message changed everything. A conversation retrieved from a seized device showed Iceman confirming payment for a shipment intercepted months earlier. The date matched. The cargo ID matched. It wasn't inference. It was connection. And it put Jamie Stevenson directly at the center of the conspiracy. Authorities began cross-referencing EncroChat transcripts with shipping records, customs logs, and financial transactions. It all began to align. Stevenson wasn't just involved, he was orchestrating. But even as the net tightened, there were whispers in the criminal underworld. Had Stevenson gone too big, too fast? Had someone tipped off the authorities? Or had his legendary discipline finally slipped? It had taken years of surveillance. Thousands of intercepted messages. International cooperation across borders. But in the spring of 2022, it happened. Police moved in. The operation was quiet, surgical, and deliberate. In an early morning raid, officers stormed Stevenson's home in Lanarkshire. A neighborhood unprepared for what was unfolding behind its own hedges. The man they found didn't resist. He was calm. Just like his nickname. Inside the house, encrypted phones. Laptops. Documents. And evidence tying him to shell companies and overseas transfers. One officer later said, he knew this day was coming. He just didn't know when. By the time news of his arrest broke, multiple properties across Scotland had already been searched. Bank accounts were frozen. Vehicles seized. The Iceman's carefully constructed world, system by system, was collapsing. But even in custody, Stevenson said almost nothing. No confession. No apology. Just silence. It was the quiet ending to a very loud empire. By October 2024, the man known only to neighbors as Jamie. The quiet father, the respectful husband, the man who waved from his driveway, was unmasked before the nation. At the High Court in Glasgow, Jamie Iceman Stevenson stood accused of orchestrating a criminal empire that spanned continents. Prosecutors didn't hold back. They called him a key figure in the industrial-scale importation and production of drugs. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers. Reporters. Victims' families. Law enforcement officers who had spent years in the shadows, following Stevenson's every move. Now, it was all on display. The evidence was damning. Encrypted messages bearing his alias, Iceman, linked to shipments and drug lab activity. Financial records showing unexplained cash flows tied to shell companies. Surveillance footage placing him at key locations in the smuggling chain. There was no smoking gun. But there didn't need to be. The web of circumstantial evidence was too precise, too complete. After years in the dark, investigators had pieced together a digital map of his empire. And the verdict? 20 years in prison. For many, it was justice. For others, it was only the beginning. News of the conviction hit the headlines. Local and national media swarmed over every detail of Stevenson's double life. A man living comfortably in Lanarkshire suburbia, sending his kids to school in the morning, while at night, overseeing the supply of deadly pills that were decimating communities just miles away. The spotlight quickly shifted to the broader crisis, at Tizalam, or Street Valium. Overdose rates had soared in recent years, and many of the pills seized during the investigation were traced back to Stevenson's operations. Parents of victims spoke out. Community leaders demanded reform. For them, this wasn't just about one man. It was about a system that had let the Iceman thrive unnoticed for so long. But just as the dust began to settle, a twist emerged. In February 2025, Stevenson's sentence was quietly revisited. Legal teams filed an appeal, arguing procedural errors, mitigation, and behind-the-scenes cooperation with certain aspects of the investigation. The outcome? His sentence was reduced, from 20 years to 16 years and 3 months. The news landed like a thunderclap. Online forums erupted. Victims' families, already shattered by the consequences of Valium abuse, expressed outrage. How could a man behind such a vast criminal enterprise walk free years earlier than expected? Some claimed backdoor deals. Others questioned the justice system. And a few wondered, if Stevenson had helped prosecutors, what had he given them? And who else might be next? One thing was clear, even behind bars, Jamie Iceman Stevenson remained a figure of influence. A man whose empire had fallen, but whose shadow hadn't disappeared. And for those still untangling the damage left behind, his legacy was far from over. Jamie Stevenson's conviction may have closed one chapter, but the story doesn't end with a prison sentence. Scotland continues to face a grim crisis. Drug-related deaths here remain the highest in Europe, and behind each statistic is a family shattered, a community broken, a future lost. The pills linked to Stevenson's network didn't just move through numbers and transactions, they moved through lives. And perhaps what's most unsettling is how invisible it all was. A man known to neighbors as quiet, polite, and devoted to his family. Living in an affluent Lanarkshire neighborhood, attending school events, and chatting about weather and football. A father. A husband. A ghost. And yet, by night, that same man was orchestrating the flow of lethal substances across borders. The Iceman didn't shout. He didn't show off. He blended in, and that made him more dangerous. But what does it say about the world we live in, when a global trafficking operation can hide inside a banana crate? This case revealed a darker evolution of organized crime. Gone are the flashy street-level dealers and muscle-bound enforcers. What's emerged instead is something far more efficient, and harder to detect. Criminal networks are now using logistics infrastructure, encrypted messaging, shell companies, and digital currencies to operate on a scale that was once unthinkable. EncroChat was a turning point. The takedown shook the criminal world. But as investigators dismantled one network, new ones quickly took its place, more secure, more fragmented, and harder to trace. And even now, with Stevenson behind bars, questions remain. How many others were involved? Was he the architect of the empire, or just a trusted broker for someone even higher up? Are there still banana shipments coming into the country, hiding more than just fruit? Police won't say. They rarely do. But organized crime has always survived by evolving, and in this digital age, it's not just surviving. It's thriving. Jamie Stevenson is gone from the streets, for now. But the structure he was part of? The systems he used? They haven't vanished. Somewhere out there, another name has taken his place. Another alias. Another encrypted message. Another neighborhood where someone seems just a little too quiet. Jamie Iceman Stevenson, father, husband, businessman. And yet, beneath that polished surface, one of Scotland's most significant figures in organized crime. A man who mastered the art of blending in while orchestrating a criminal empire that spanned continents and cost lives. From banana shipments laced with secrets to street Valium labs fueling a national crisis, Stevenson's downfall offered a rare look behind the curtain of Scotland's criminal underworld. But was this truly the end of the story, or just one chapter in a much larger book? That's the question we leave with you. How do you stop organized crime, when it wears the face of normalcy? When it hides behind businesses, neighborhoods, and family dinners? And more importantly, have we really seen the last of operations like this? Or are others already out there, laying the groundwork in silence? If this story made you think, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another deep dive into the criminal networks hiding beneath the surface of everyday life in the UK. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and stay safe.